Example number 1, describing the graph of a sinusoidal function. So the graph of a sinusoidal function is shown, so right here. Describe the graph by determining its range. Okay, so that has to do with our y values, the equation of its midline, its amplitude, and its period. So let's first talk about range. So this is all the y values it can be. So I'm going to say that the range here is, it goes between -3 and +7. And y is an element of the reals. Now this is really important, the maxes and mins, because that will help us determine the equation of the midline. So the equation of the midline is going to be y equals, I'm going to say the minimum plus the maximum divided by 2. So it's the average between those two. So then -3 plus 4, sorry, -3 plus 7 is 4, divided by 2 is 2, so y equals 2. So if I were to draw a line right at -2, half the graph would be above that line and half the graph would be below that line. Let's talk about the amplitude. That's the distance from the midline. If I were to draw this midline here, it's this distance here or this distance here. So let's just keep it positive. I'm going to take the minimum minus the amplitude. Sorry, the minimum minus the equation or the value of the midline. Or I can say, oh sorry, this should actually be the maximum. So the maximum minus the value of the midline, or we can calculate it saying the value of the midline minus the min. Let's do both. So the maximum here is going to be 7 minus the value of the midline is 2. So our amplitude is going to be 5. Let's see if we get 5 if we use the other way. So we say the value of the midline, which is 2, minus the minimum, which is -3. 2 minus -3, which is 2 plus 3, is 5. So either way you slice it, either way you calculate it, you're going to come up with the same thing. Now let's determine this thing's period. There are two different ways that we can do it, and I'm going to show you one way on this example and one way on the next example. Essentially, all we need to do is find the distance between two maximums or the distance between two consecutive minimums. So if I were to be going from this minimum right here, it's halfway between 120 and 240, so this is going to be at 180 degrees. The next minimum that happens is at 360 degrees. So that means the period is 360 degrees minus 180 degrees, which is 180 degrees. Now you're going to go by whatever values or whatever units are on that x-axis. Okay, so in this exact one, we're finding that the angle has been calculated in degrees. Let's look at this next one, example 2. So you'll notice that this one right here is in degrees. But let's look at this one right here in radians, because describing the graph of a sinusoidal function in radian measure. Essentially, the only thing that's different here is the fact that it's the units here are not in degrees. That's all we need to do to be able to analyze it in this way. So we're going to talk about the same thing: range, equation of midline, amplitude, and period. So we're going to talk about the range. So the range is going to go from +2 to -4. So -4 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to 2. So this is going to be your minimum. Minimum occurs at -4. This is going to be your maximum. Maximum happens at 2. You're not going to change these signs. It's always going to point to the left, because y is less than 2. Pac-Man needs a bigger number. And -4 is less than y. So that means that the function goes between -4 and +2. We'll find the equation of the midline. So we're going to say y equals the maximum, 2, plus the minimum, which is -4. We're going to divide that by 2. 2 minus 4 is -2. Divided by 2, y is going to be -1. So if I were to draw a line right here, this is going to be my midline, because half the graph is going to be above that midline and half the graph is going to be below. Now that we know what the equation of the midline is, we can find the amplitude. So I'm just going to go with this one. I'm going to say 2 minus -1 equals, so a maximum minus the midline, that's going to be 3. So the amplitude is 3. Now with this one, it's tricky to see the period, right? Because it's not, we don't see one full cycle. So I'm going to show you a different way. What you're going to do is take the x value of max and you're going to take the x value of a min. So I'm going to call this A. I'm going to call this B. You're going to find the difference between those two things. So in this case, I'm going to say that the x value of the max here is going to be 1.25. And the x value of the min here is going to be 1.75. Sorry, 3.75, my bad. So to find the distance between these two, what I'm going to say is 3.75 minus 1.25, which is 2.5. So half of the period goes from maximum to minimum, or from minimum to maximum. So what we must do is we must multiply by 2. So the period equals 5. So let's just take a moment and summarize what we know. So to calculate the equation of the midline, we're going to say the y value of max minus the y value of min divided by 2. And since it's an equation and it's a horizontal equation, we're going to say y equals. Okay, y equals the y value of the max minus the y value of min divided by 2. The way that we calculate the amplitude is either going to be the y value of max minus the value of midline, or the value of midline minus the y value of the minimum. And how to calculate the period? Essentially, two ways. You can say the distance, well, I should specify the x distance between, so the horizontal distance between two maxes or two mins. The second way is you say the x distance between max and adjacent min, and then what you want to do is you multiply it by 2.